The text message saying, "Sorry, Mom, can't cancel Cabo. The deposits are non-refundable. Get well soon." Red heart arrived while I was fighting for my life in the ICU. What my family didn't know was that while they were sipping margaritas, I was making decisions that would change their lives forever. My name is Dorothy Henderson. I'm 70 years old. 3 weeks ago, I was dying in the cardiac intensive care unit at Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. Machines were keeping my heart beating, tubes snaked out of my chest. The cardiologist, Dr. Patricia Chen, had just delivered devastating news to my family. "Mrs. Henderson suffered a massive cardiac event," she told my children. "The next 72 hours are critical. We're doing everything we can, but this is touch and go. She needs all the support she can get right now." I heard those words through a fog of medications. I thought this was when my family would rally around me. When my children would drop everything to be there for the woman who'd spent decades being there for them. Mishik Seversoil, I was wrong. Jessica was checking her phone for flight confirmations while Dr. Chen was still talking about my prognosis. "We really can't miss this trip, Mom," Jessica whispered when she thought I couldn't hear. "We've been planning Cabo for months. The deposits are non-refundable. You understand, right?" Let me tell you what I had built over 70 years, so you understand exactly what was at stake while I lay dying alone in that hospital room. I wasn't born into wealth. I started with nothing. I built everything through determination and refusing to accept failure. Henderson's Fine Catering began in my kitchen 28 years ago. I was a newly divorced 42-year-old woman with 2 young children. I had a monthly mortgage payment that seemed impossible on a single income. I started making birthday cakes for neighbors. $25 each. I hoped word would spread. Within 6 months, I was catering small dinner parties. Within 2 years, I was handling corporate events for Charlotte's biggest law firms and financial companies. By the time Jessica graduated high school, Henderson's Fine Catering was the premier catering service in Charlotte. We handled society weddings at the Charlotte Country Club, million-dollar fundraising galas for the local symphony, corporate events for Bank of America executives. I employed 37 people during peak season. I had a waiting list of clients who planned their events a year in advance, just to secure my services. The business that started in my kitchen with a $25 birthday cake was generating over $2 million in annual revenue. I'd built something that mattered. Something that employed dozens of families. Something that brought joy to thousands of people during their most important celebrations. But the business was just one part of what I'd created. My home in Myers Park was a testament to what a determined woman could accomplish. I'd purchased the 1920s Colonial in 1998. The previous owners were desperate to sell after a messy divorce. The house needed everything. New roof. Updated electrical. Complete kitchen renovation. Landscaping that hadn't been touched in decades. I spent 3 years of weekends and vacations turning that house into something extraordinary. I learned to tile bathrooms by watching YouTube videos. I taught myself garden design by reading library books. I visited every nursery within 50 miles of Charlotte. I hired contractors for the major work, but I did everything else myself. I was determined to create a home that reflected the success I'd earned through decades of hard work. The result was stunning. 4 bedrooms with original hardwood floors I'd refinished myself. A gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and professional-grade appliances. The kitchen had been featured in Charlotte Home and Garden magazine. Rebellious, I created gardens that changed with the seasons. Spring daffodils giving way to summer roses. Autumn chrysanthemums. Winter evergreens that provided year-round beauty. Real estate agents estimated the house's current value at $850,000. But to me, it was priceless. Every room contained memories of holidays and family gatherings, birthday parties and graduation celebrations. It was the anchor that provided stability for Jessica and Michael during their teenage years, after their father left us for his 26-year-old secretary. Most importantly, I'd spent the last 20 years being the family foundation, financially, emotionally, and practically supporting my children and grandchildren. in ways that went far beyond normal parental responsibilities. When Jessica's marriage fell apart 5 years ago, she needed money for divorce attorneys. I wrote a check for $15,000 without hesitation. When Michael's startup business needed capital and the bank turned down his loan application, I provided $25,000 to help him get established. When my grandson Tyler wanted to attend private school but Jessica couldn't afford the tuition, Grandma Dorothy covered $18,000 annually. For 3 years running, emergency car repairs, medical bills not covered by insurance, down payments for houses, wedding expenses, furniture for new apartments. I'd been the family safety net for decades, never keeping track of the money I'd given. Because that's what families do for each other. I'd attended every soccer game, every school play, every graduation ceremony. I'd babysat whenever Jessica needed time to herself. I'd provided Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations that brought our scattered family together. I'd been the reliable constant in their lives, the person they could count on no matter what challenges they faced. I thought I'd raised children who understood the value of family loyalty. I thought I'd modeled the kind of love and support that creates unbreakable bonds between parents and children. I thought that when I needed them most, they would be there for me, the way I'd always been there for them. It was but I was spectacularly wrong. The conversation I overheard between Jessica and Michael revealed exactly how my children viewed me and my current crisis. They stood outside my ICU room, apparently unaware that heavily sedated doesn't mean completely deaf. "How long do you think this will take?" Michael asked Jessica. "I don't know," Jessica replied. "The doctor said it could go either way. But honestly, Michael, we can't put our lives on hold indefinitely. She's 70 years old. If this doesn't kill her, something else will in the next few years anyway. If this doesn't kill her, something else will anyway." My daughter was discussing my death like it was an inconvenient scheduling conflict. "The thing is," Michael continued, "we've already paid for Cabo. $8,000 for the resort, plus flights. And you know how hard it was to coordinate everyone's schedules." "Right," Jessica agreed. "And it's not like sitting here staring at her is going to make her heart work better. The doctors are handling everything. We'll just be in the way." Just be in the way. In my moment of greatest vulnerability, when I was fighting for my life, my children saw their presence as unnecessary. "Besides," Jessica added, and these words are burned into my memory forever, "if something happens while we're gone, at least we'll have had one last good vacation before dealing with all the funeral arrangements and estate stuff." One last good vacation before dealing with funeral arrangements. They were already planning my funeral while I was still breathing. Say hellos, that's when I understood. The children I'd raised and sacrificed for saw me not as a beloved mother fighting for her life, but as an elderly obligation whose death would be more convenient than her continued existence. When Dr. Chen told them I was stable enough that they could take a brief break if needed, Jessica and Michael seized on that permission, like it was a royal decree. "Mom, you're tough. You'll pull through this," Jessica said. She was already checking her phone for flight updates while I lay there with tubes coming out of my chest. Machines monitoring every heartbeat. Besides, Michael already took the time off work, and you know how hard it is for him to get vacation days. The hospital has your information if anything changes. "The doctors said you're stable now," Michael added. He avoided eye contact as he bent down to kiss my forehead goodbye. "We'll check in from Mexico, okay? Try to get some rest." And just like that, they were gone, off to their beachfront resort with their spouses and my grandchildren, while I faced the possibility of dying alone in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by nothing but the steady beeping of machines, and the occasional check-ins from overworked nurses who had a dozen other patients requiring their attention. But here's what Jessica and Michael didn't understand about the woman they'd abandoned in that ICU. I didn't build a successful business by giving up when things got difficult. I didn't survive a devastating divorce and single motherhood by accepting defeat. I didn't create a beautiful home and a thriving company by letting other people dictate what I deserved, or how I should be treated. I was Dorothy Henderson, the woman who'd started with nothing and built something extraordinary. Through determination, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to be underestimated or dismissed. They thought they were leaving behind a helpless old woman, someone who would be grateful for whatever attention they chose to give her when they returned from their vacation. They thought I was too sick, too vulnerable, and too dependent on their good graces to do anything. Accept their abandonment with grace and understanding. They were about to discover they'd made the biggest miscalculation of their lives. Because while they were posting Instagram photos of themselves drinking cocktails on the beach, I was making phone calls. Calls that would fundamentally alter our family dynamics forever. They were tagging their location at luxury resorts, sharing videos of sunset dinners. While I was contacting my attorney about changes to my will, this hour, I was speaking with my accountant about restructuring my business ownership. I was having conversations with social workers about my care preferences and my family's behavior during my medical crisis. Deadass. I was documenting everything. The abandoned bedside vigil. The overheard conversations about my death being convenient. The choice to prioritize vacation deposits over their mother's life. When Jessica and Michael walked back into my hospital room 5 days later, they were tanned and relaxed from their beachfront vacation. They expected to find the same grateful, generous mother they'd always taken for granted. Instead, they found someone completely different. Someone who'd learned exactly what she was worth to the people she'd spent decades caring for. Someone who'd had plenty of time to think about the choices her children had made, and the consequences those choices deserved. Someone who understood that love and loyalty are not one-way streets, that family obligations work both ways. The woman they abandoned in that ICU was gone forever. The woman they came back to find had something much more valuable than money or property. She had absolute clarity about who deserved her love, her support, and her legacy, and who had forfeited those privileges through their own callous choices. This is the story of how my children chose a vacation over their mother's life, and how that choice cost them everything they thought they were entitled to inherit. This is the story of what happens when you assume that unconditional love means you can treat someone however you want without consequences. This is the story of how karma works when you abandon someone who spent decades making sure you never had to face life's challenges alone. To understand how devastating Jessica and Michael's betrayal truly was, you need to know where I came from. You need to understand the woman they abandoned wasn't born into privilege. I was forged by hardship, shaped by struggle, and strengthened by every obstacle life threw at me. My story begins 70 years ago in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in East Cleveland, Ohio. The year was 1953. I was Dorothy Mae Sullivan then, the youngest of 6 children in a family that barely had enough food for 3. My father, Patrick Sullivan, worked sporadically at the steel mills when his drinking didn't interfere with his employment, which was often. My mother, Catherine, took in laundry and mending from wealthier families to supplement his unreliable income. Our apartment on the 3rd floor of a crumbling tenement building had thin walls, broken windows, and a radiator that worked only when it felt like it. I shared a bed with my 3 sisters, Mary, Frances, and little Katie. My 2 brothers, Tommy and Kevin, slept on a pull-out couch in the living room that doubled as our kitchen. Privacy was non-existent. Quiet was impossible. The smell of industrial soap and boiled potatoes permeated everything we owned. But even in that chaotic, overcrowded environment, I learned lessons that would shape the rest of my life. "Dorothy, you're the smart one," my mother would tell me as she taught me to iron shirts for the neighbors who paid her a quarter each. "You're going to make something of yourself. You're going to have a better life than this." Catherine Sullivan was only 32 years old then, but she looked 50. 6 pregnancies, endless worry about money, and the stress of living with an alcoholic husband had aged her prematurely. Her hands were permanently stained from the harsh soap she used. Her back was bent from hours spent hunched over other people's laundry. But her spirit wasn't broken. Not yet. "How do you know I'm the smart one, Mama?" I asked her one evening as we folded sheets together in our tiny living room. "Because you ask questions," she said, smoothing wrinkles with practiced efficiency. "Smart people want to understand how things work. Dumb people just accept what they're given." I was only 7 years old, but I understood what she meant. My older siblings had already accepted that our family's poverty was permanent, unchangeable. Mary had dropped out of school at 14 to work at the local Five and Dime. Francis was dating a boy from the neighborhood who worked at the same steel mill as our father. Tommy and Kevin talked about following in Patrick's footsteps, assuming that seasonal employment at the mills was the best they could hope for. But I couldn't accept that this cramped, chaotic existence was all life had to offer. I wanted to understand why some families had nice houses while we lived in a tenement. I wanted to know why some children had new clothes while we wore hand-me-downs from church charity drives. I wanted to figure out how to change our circumstances instead of just enduring them. Bun. School became my refuge and my obsession. While my siblings saw homework as an unwelcome chore, I saw it as a pathway to something better. I studied by the light of a single bulb in our bedroom while my sisters slept, doing math problems and reading assignments with a dedication that probably seemed excessive to my family. But I had a plan, even as a young child. I was going to earn scholarships that would pay for high school and college. I was going to learn a profession that would provide steady income and respect. I was going to create a life so different from my childhood that my own children would never know what it felt like to worry about having enough food or a safe place to sleep. Boadaf. My teachers noticed my determination quickly. Mrs. Anderson, my third-grade teacher, started giving me extra books to read at home. Mr. Kelly, my fifth-grade math teacher, tutored me during lunch breaks to prepare for advanced courses. Miss Rodriguez, my seventh-grade English teacher, helped me apply for an academic scholarship to attend Sacred Heart Academy, the private Catholic high school where wealthy families sent their daughters. Dorothy has exceptional potential, Miss Rodriguez told my mother during a parent conference I'd begged her to attend. With the right educational opportunities, she could qualify for a full college scholarship. College. The word seemed as foreign and impossible as saying I might fly to the moon. No one in our family had finished high school, let alone attended college. But Miss Rodriguez spoke about my future with such confidence that even my mother began to believe it might be possible. What would she study? Catherine asked. Her work-worn hands folded carefully in her lap as she sat in the pristine classroom. That was nicer than our entire apartment. She's shown tremendous aptitude for sciences and mathematics, Miss Rodriguez replied. Perhaps medicine or nursing. Both are excellent careers for young women. Both offer steady employment and good wages. Nursing. The moment she said it, I knew that was my answer. Nurses helped people. They had important jobs that required education and skill. They wore clean uniforms and worked in modern hospitals instead of factories. They earned enough money to live in nice houses and send their own children to good schools. Miftahabio Chanian Tahe. I was going to become a nurse. And I was going to use that career to build the kind of life my mother had dreamed about, but never achieved. Sacred Heart Academy was like entering a different world. The building was modern and clean. Bright classrooms, well-equipped laboratories, and a library that seemed impossibly vast to someone who'd grown up without a single book in her home. The other students came from families with money. Doctors, lawyers, successful businessmen who could afford the tuition without thinking twice about it. I was there on full scholarship, which meant I had to maintain perfect grades while also working part-time jobs to pay for uniforms, books, and transportation. Every morning, I took 2 buses to reach the academy, leaving our tenement apartment at 6:30 a.m. and not returning until after 8 p.m. most nights. The academic work was challenging but manageable. I'd always been good at studying, and Sacred Heart's teachers were even more demanding than my previous schools. What was harder was the social isolation. The other girls talked about family vacations to Europe, shopping trips to expensive stores, college plans that their parents would fund without question. I listened politely but rarely contributed to those conversations, acutely aware that my experiences were completely different from theirs. "Where is your family planning to summer this year?" asked Elizabeth Morrison, whose father owned a chain of department stores throughout Ohio. "We don't really do summer vacations," I replied honestly, not mentioning that my idea of a summer adventure was finding a job that paid better than babysitting for neighbors. Oh, Elizabeth said, clearly not knowing how to respond to such an alien concept. But the academic rigor was exactly what I needed. Sacred Heart's science program was exceptional. Laboratory equipment that most public schools couldn't afford. Teachers who had advanced degrees from prestigious universities. I threw myself into chemistry, biology, and anatomy, with the same intensity I'd applied to everything else in my life. Miss Sullivan, you have a natural aptitude for the medical sciences, Sister Margaret told me during my junior year. Have you considered applying to the nursing program at Case Western Reserve University? Case Western Reserve, one of the most respected nursing schools in the country. Also one of the most expensive. But Sister Margaret explained that strong academic performance could qualify me for scholarships that would cover tuition, room, and board. What would I need to do, I asked, already calculating the extra studying and preparation required. Maintain your current grade point average, score well on entrance examinations, demonstrate leadership in extracurricular activities, she explained. I think you're quite capable of meeting those requirements. For the next 2 years, I lived like a monk, devoted to academic success. I studied until midnight every night. Participated in student government and volunteer activities. Worked part-time jobs to save money for college application fees. I had no social life, no boyfriend, and no interests beyond preparing for my future career. My family didn't understand my single-minded focus. Dorothy's always got her nose in a book, my father would complain when neighbors asked about his youngest daughter. Acts like she's too good for the rest of us. But my mother understood. She'd watch me studying at our kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. And she'd nod approvingly. You're doing what you need to do, she'd tell me quietly. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about working towards something better. In the spring of 1971, I received the acceptance letter that would change my life forever. Case Western Reserve University School of Nursing was offering me a full scholarship, tuition, room, board, and a small stipend for books and supplies. I would be the first person in my family to attend college. And I wouldn't have to pay a penny for the privilege. My mother cried when I showed her the letter. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride and relief. You did it, she whispered, holding the official document like it was made of gold. You actually did it. Moving to Cleveland in September 1971 was like immigrating to a foreign country. The Case Western campus was larger than the entire neighborhood where I'd grown up. My dormitory room, which I shared with a roommate from Shaker Heights, was cleaner and more comfortable than anywhere I'd ever lived. The dining hall served food I'd never seen before. The library contained more books than I'd imagined existed in the entire world. But what struck me most was the freedom. For the first time in my life, I could make my own schedule, choose my own activities, focus entirely on my education without worrying about family obligations or part-time jobs. The scholarship covered everything I needed, leaving me free to immerse myself completely in nursing studies. HICHAS. The coursework was demanding but fascinating. Anatomy and physiology, pharmacology, psychology, medical ethics. Every class revealed new layers of complexity in the human experience of health and illness. But more than the academic knowledge, I was learning practical skills that would allow me to care for people during their most vulnerable moments. During my clinical rotations at university hospitals, I discovered that I had a natural ability to connect with patients and families facing medical crises. I could remain calm during emergencies, think clearly under pressure, provide both technical care and emotional support when people needed it most. Dorothy, you have excellent instincts for patient care, my supervising nurse told me during my pediatric rotation. You're going to be a very good nurse. A very good nurse. Those words meant everything to me. I wasn't just escaping poverty, I was preparing for a career that would allow me to make a meaningful difference in people's lives, while earning enough money to live independently and comfortably. But nursing school also taught me something else that would prove crucial later in life. the importance of advocating for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. Many of our patients were elderly, confused, or too sick to understand their treatment options. Part of our job as nurses was ensuring they received appropriate care, even when they couldn't demand it themselves. I had no idea how relevant that lesson would become 50 years later. Ibe Kunbi's Trejiawa Boyas Rin, the summer between my junior and senior years, tragedy struck our family. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months to live. I spent that summer commuting between Cleveland and our apartment in East Cleveland, trying to balance my accelerated summer coursework with caring for the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give me opportunities she'd never had. Catherine Sullivan died on a September morning, 3 days before I was supposed to start my senior year. She was 49 years old. Worn out by a lifetime of poverty, hard work, and worry about her children's futures. "Promise me something, Dorothy," she whispered during our last conversation, her voice barely audible above the oxygen machine that was helping her breathe. "Anything, Mama," I said, holding her hand. "Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small," she said. "You're gonna do great things. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve whatever success you earn." Those were among the last coherent words my mother ever spoke, and they became the foundation of every major decision I made for the rest of my life. I graduated from nursing school in May 1975 with highest honors, the valedictorian of my class. At the graduation ceremony, as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I thought about the 7-year-old girl who'd asked her mother why some families had nice houses while others lived in tenements. I'd found my answer. Some families had nice houses because someone in that family had refused to accept that poverty was permanent. Someone had worked harder, studied longer, and sacrificed more than seemed humanly possible to change their circumstances. I was going to be that someone for my future family. My first job was as a staff nurse in the cardiac unit at Charlotte Memorial Hospital in North Carolina. I'd chosen Charlotte because it was a growing city with opportunities for advancement. Far enough from Cleveland to start fresh, but not so far that I couldn't drive home if my remaining family needed me. The work was demanding but rewarding. 12-hour shifts caring for patients recovering from heart attacks, heart surgery, and other cardiac emergencies. I loved the fast pace, the medical complexity, and the feeling that my skills were making a real difference in people's lives. But more than that, I loved the independence my nursing career provided. I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment near the hospital. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, safe, and entirely mine. I could afford to eat in restaurants occasionally, buy new clothes when I wanted them, save money for the future I was planning. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about money. I wasn't dependent on anyone else for my basic needs. I wasn't accepting hand-me-downs or charity or other people's pity. Irin Tesbe, I was Dorothy Sullivan, RN, a professional with important responsibilities and respected skills. Someone who mattered in the world. It was during my second year at Charlotte Memorial that I met James Henderson. Not in the dramatic way you might expect, but in the most ordinary setting imaginable. The hospital cafeteria on a Tuesday afternoon in March 1977. I was eating lunch alone, reading a nursing journal, when a man about my age approached my table. He was tall, with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a suit that looked expensive but not flashy. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I know this is presumptuous, but I'm new in town and don't know many people. Would you mind if I joined you for lunch?" I looked up from my journal, ready to politely decline. I'd learned to be cautious about men who approached women eating alone. But something about his demeanor seemed genuine rather than predatory. "I suppose that would be fine," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Thank you," he said, sitting down. "I'm James Henderson. I just moved here from Richmond to start a position with First National Bank." "Dorothy Sullivan," I replied. "I'm a nurse here at the hospital." James turned out to be unlike any man I'd ever met. He was educated but not condescending. Successful but not arrogant. Interested in my work and opinions rather than just trying to impress me with his own accomplishments. He'd grown up in Virginia, the son of a small-town banker who taught him that financial success meant nothing if you didn't use it to help others. He'd earned a degree in business and finance from the University of Virginia, spent 5 years working for a bank in Richmond before accepting a promotion that brought him to Charlotte. "What made you choose nursing?" he asked as we talked over coffee. I told him about my childhood in Cleveland, my mother's dreams for my education, my determination to build a life that was different from the poverty I'd grown up with. James listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood the significance of what I'd accomplished. "That's remarkable," he said when I finished. "You should be very proud of yourself." I was proud, but I'd never met someone who recognized the magnitude of what it meant to lift yourself out of generational poverty through education and determination. Most people either didn't understand the struggle or assumed that academic scholarships made the journey easy. James understood that nothing about my path had been easy. Over the next few months, we started dating seriously. James was everything I'd hoped to find in a partner: ambitious but not ruthless, financially stable but not materialistic, supportive of my career goals rather than threatened by my independence. More importantly, he shared my values about hard work, family loyalty, and building something lasting together. "I want to create a life that matters," he told me one evening as we walked through downtown Charlotte. "Not just accumulate money or status, but actually build something that will outlast us." "What kind of something?" I asked. "A family," he said. "A home. A legacy of love and stability that we can pass on to our children." That was the moment I knew I'd found my life partner. Someone who understood that true wealth wasn't about money. It was about creating something beautiful and meaningful that would endure long after we were gone. James proposed on Christmas Eve 1978, in the small apartment I'd made into a home through determination and careful budgeting. It wasn't the most romantic setting in the world, but it was ours. It represented everything we'd both worked to achieve. "Dorothy," he said, getting down on one knee beside my tiny Christmas tree, "you're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. Will you marry me and help me build the kind of life we've both been dreaming about?" I said yes, without hesitation. Not because I needed James to complete me, but because I'd found someone who complemented my strengths and shared my vision for the future. We were married in June 1979 in a small ceremony at the Presbyterian church near the hospital. I wore a simple white dress I'd bought with money I'd saved from my nursing salary. James wore the same suit he'd been wearing the day we met in the cafeteria. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, with food I'd prepared myself and decorations James and I had made together. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it was perfect because it reflected who we were. Two people who'd worked hard for everything they had and weren't ashamed of their humble beginnings. Our honeymoon was a long weekend in the mountains of North Carolina. We couldn't afford an expensive trip, but we didn't care. We were too excited about starting our life together to worry about traditions we couldn't afford. When we returned from our honeymoon, James and I sat down at my kitchen table and planned our future with the same methodical approach I'd applied to everything else in my life. "What do we want to accomplish in the next 10 years?" I asked, pulling out a notebook to write down our goals. "Financial stability," James said immediately. "I want us to be in a position where we never have to worry about money the way our parents did." "A house," I added. "Not just any house, but something we can be proud of, something that reflects the life we're building together." "Children," James said softly. "I want to raise children who understand the value of hard work, but never have to experience the insecurity we both grew up with." "How many children?" I asked. "2," James said without hesitation. "Close enough in age to be companions for each other, but far enough apart that we can give each one the individual attention they deserve." I wrote it all down in my careful handwriting. Our 5-year plan, our 10-year plan, our dreams for the family we wanted to create. It was the blueprint for the life that Jessica and Michael would eventually take for granted. Mashal. The life they would abandon me to protect. But that night, sitting in my tiny apartment with my new husband, planning the future we would build together, I felt nothing but hope and determination. I was Dorothy Henderson now, a married woman with a career I loved, a partner who shared my values, and a clear vision for the life we were going to create. I'd come so far from the 7-year-old girl sharing a bed with 3 sisters in a tenement apartment. I'd kept every promise I'd made to my dying mother about making something of myself and never letting anyone make me feel small. What I didn't know was that 50 years later, the children I would raise with such love and sacrifice would try to make me feel smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. They would reduce me to an inconvenience, a burden, an obstacle to their vacation plans. But they would discover, as everyone who'd ever underestimated me had learned, that Dorothy Henderson was not a woman who stayed down when life knocked her over. I was a fighter. I'd always been a fighter. And I wasn't done fighting yet. James and I didn't just fall in love. We fell in love with a shared vision of what our life could become. 2 people who'd both known what it meant to struggle, were determined to build something extraordinary together. Our first apartment as newlyweds was a modest 2-bedroom unit in a complex near downtown Charlotte. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, safe, and affordable on our combined salaries. James was earning good money at First National Bank. I was making steady income as a cardiac nurse. Together, we had more financial security than either of us had ever experienced. But we weren't satisfied with just getting by. We wanted to create something lasting. "Ha! Dorothy," James said one evening as we sat at our small kitchen table, reviewing our monthly budget. "What's your biggest dream for our future?" I'd been thinking about that question for months, ever since we'd gotten engaged and started planning a life together. "I want to build a family that never has to worry about money the way we did growing up," I said. "But more than that, I want to create a home that represents everything we've worked for. Something beautiful and substantial that we can pass down to our children." James nodded. "I want the same thing. But I also want to build a business, something of my own, not just working for someone else's bank." "What kind of business?" I asked. "I've been thinking about that," James said, pulling out a notebook where he'd been sketching ideas. "Charlotte is growing fast. New families moving here every month. They're going to need banking services, but more personal than what the big banks provide." "A community bank?" I asked. "Exactly," James said, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Something that focuses on helping families achieve their dreams, rather than just processing transactions. Mortgages for first-time homebuyers, small business loans for entrepreneurs, personal relationships instead of corporate policies." I could see the vision taking shape as he talked. James had grown up watching his father help small-town families achieve financial stability through careful guidance and fair lending practices. He wanted to bring that same philosophy to a growing city like Charlotte. "How much would it cost to start something like that?" I asked. James had already researched the requirements. Minimum capitalization of $500,000 to get federal approval, plus operating expenses for the first 2 years while we build our customer base. $500,000. It might as well have been $5 million. We had maybe $8,000 in savings between us. "That's a lot of money," I said carefully, not wanting to crush his dream but being realistic about our situation. "I know," James said. "But Dorothy, I've done the math. If we both keep working and save aggressively, we could have the capital we need in 8 to 10 years. 8 to 10 years of saving every possible dollar. Living below our means. Postponing other dreams while we built toward this bigger goal. What about buying a house?" I asked. "Starting a family?" "We can do all of it," James said confidently. "It just means being strategic about the timing and being willing to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term success." That conversation became the foundation of everything we built together. We weren't just planning a marriage, we were planning a life of purposeful achievement. Over the next few weeks, James and I developed what we called our 10-year plan. It was ambitious, maybe unrealistic, but it gave us a clear roadmap for achieving our biggest dreams. Years 1 to 3, save aggressively while renting, build our credit and establish ourselves professionally, start a family when we had sufficient emergency savings. Years 4 to 6, buy our first house. Something modest that we could afford comfortably while still saving for the bank. Focus on raising our children and continuing our careers. Years 7 to 10, Accumulate the capital needed to start Henderson Community Bank. Buy a larger home that reflected our success. Establish ourselves as leaders in Charlotte's business community. It was an aggressive timeline, but we were both willing to make the sacrifices necessary to achieve it. The first test of our commitment came sooner than expected. In August 1979, just 2 months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Already? James said when I told him the news. Not upset, but surprised by the timing. Are you disappointed? I asked, suddenly worried that an early pregnancy would derail our carefully made plans. Disappointed? James said, pulling me into his arms. Dorothy, this is wonderful news. We just need to adjust our timeline slightly. Adjust our timeline. That became our approach to every unexpected challenge over the next decade. We didn't abandon our goals when circumstances changed. We adapted our strategy while keeping our eyes on the ultimate prize. Jessica Marie Henderson was born on April 15, 1980. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of perfect possibility. When the tezity. Nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, I made her the same promise my mother had made to me decades earlier. I'm going to give you everything I never had, I whispered to her tiny sleeping face. You're going to grow up with security, opportunities, and parents who will always be there for you. It was a promise I kept faithfully for the next 43 years. A promise that Jessica apparently saw as weakness rather than love. Ikai swirly Coppertides. Having a baby while working full-time as a nurse was challenging, but we made it work. Charlotte Memorial Hospital had excellent benefits, including paid maternity leave and affordable childcare. James's schedule at the bank was flexible enough that he could handle morning duties while I worked evening shifts. We were exhausted most of the time, but we were also happy. More than happy, we were building exactly the life we'd envisioned. We were in MAF. Our savings account grew slowly but steadily. Every month, we deposited a fixed percentage of our income into what we called our dream fund. Money that was designated specifically for the house and business we planned to buy someday. We lived frugally but not miserably. We cooked meals at home instead of eating in restaurants. We shopped for clothes at discount stores and thrift shops. We drove used cars until they literally wouldn't run anymore. But we also took Jessica to the zoo, had picnics in the park, and found ways to enjoy life that didn't require spending money we were saving for the future. Look at this, James said one evening when Jessica was about 6 months old. He was balancing our checkbook at the kitchen table while I fed the baby. We saved $847 this month. $847 might not sound like much, but for a young couple with a new baby, it represented real sacrifice and discipline. How much do we have total now? I asked. $12,400, James said with pride. If we keep this pace, we'll have enough for a house down payment within 2 years. 2 years. That would put us ahead of our original timeline, even with the early addition of Jessica to our family. But life had other plans. In November 1980, when Jessica was 7 months old, James's father had a heart attack. Harold Henderson was only 54 years old, but decades of stress from running a small-town bank during difficult economic times had taken its toll. I need to go to Richmond, James told me after getting the phone call from his mother. Dad's in intensive care. The doctors don't know if he's going to make it. Of course, I said immediately. Take as much time as you need. Jessica and I will be fine. James was gone for 3 weeks. His father survived the heart attack but required extensive recovery time. The small bank Harold had built over 20 years was struggling without his daily management. Dorothy, James said when he called me from Richmond, I think I need to move back here temporarily. Dad can't run the bank in his condition, and they're talking about selling to a larger institution if someone doesn't step in. Move to Richmond. Leave Charlotte, our jobs, our carefully planned future. What would that mean for us? I asked. I don't know, James admitted. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. However long it takes to either get Dad back on his feet or find a qualified buyer who won't destroy what he's built. I could hear the conflict in James's voice. He felt obligated to help his father, but he also didn't want to derail the life we were building in Charlotte. James, I said, we go where we need to go. Family comes first. That decision cost us financially, James had to leave his position at First National Bank. I had to resign from Charlotte Memorial Hospital. We moved to Richmond in December 1980, using a significant portion of our savings for the relocation and spell planned. The reduction in our combined income. But it was the right decision. Not just financially, but morally. James spent the next 18 months learning every aspect of his father's business, while gradually taking over daily operations. I found work as a nurse at Talos, Richmond General Hospital, though at a lower salary than I'd been earning in Charlotte. Harold Henderson recovered slowly but completely. More importantly, he was able to watch his son transform a struggling small-town bank into a thriving community institution. In's form, Mary, "You're better at this than I ever was," Harold told James one afternoon as they reviewed loan applications together. "You understand people in a way that I never did." James had inherited his father's conservative approach to lending, but he'd added something new. A genuine interest in helping people achieve their dreams, rather than just protecting the bank's interests. Under James's leadership, Henderson Community Bank started offering first-time homebuyer programs, small business development loans, and financial education classes for young families. The bank's customer base grew by 40% in 18 months. "You know what this means, don't you?" Harold asked James as they looked at the quarterly reports showing record profits. "What?" James asked. "You don't need to start your own bank," Harold said with a smile. "You can buy this one. Buy the bank." The idea had never occurred to us, but it made perfect sense. Instead of starting from scratch in Charlotte, James could purchase an established institution with a solid reputation and existing customer base. "How much would that cost?" James asked. Harold had already had the bank appraised. $450,000. I'd finance it myself, with reasonable terms and a payment schedule that works with the bank's cash flow. $450,000. We'd been saving toward $500,000 for a new bank. This was actually less expensive than our original plan, with significantly less risk. "What do you think?" James asked me that evening as we discussed Harold's offer. "I think your father is giving us the opportunity of a lifetime," I said. "But what about Charlotte? What about the life we planned there?" "Maybe this is better," James said. "Richmond is smaller, more personal. It would be easier to raise children here, and we'd be close to family." He was right. Richmond in 1982 was a growing city with strong economic fundamentals, but still small enough that a community bank could make a real difference in people's lives. "If we do this," I said, "we need to do it right. Not just continue what your father built, but expand it. Make it something our children can be proud of." That conversation led to our decision to purchase Henderson Community Bank and make Richmond our permanent home. It wasn't the path we'd originally planned, but it was better in many ways. The bank purchase was completed in March 1982, just before Jessica's second birthday. James officially became president and CEO of an institution that would become the foundation of our family's financial success. But success didn't come automatically. James worked 60-hour weeks learning every aspect of bank management while I juggled nursing shifts with caring for a toddler. We were both exhausted, but we were also excited about building something together. "I want to expand our mortgage program," James told me one evening as we reviewed the bank's loan portfolio. "There are so many young families in Richmond who could afford homeownership if they had access to creative financing options." "What kind of creative financing?" I asked. "Lower down payment requirements, longer repayment terms, first-time buyer education programs, ways to help people qualify for loans that the big banks won't consider." James's approach to banking was revolutionary for the time. Instead of focusing solely on minimizing risk, he focused on maximizing opportunity for borrowers while still maintaining sound lending practices. The results were impressive. Henderson Community Bank's mortgage volume increased by 200% in James's first year as president. But more importantly, we were helping families achieve homeownership who might never have qualified with traditional lenders. "Look at this," James said one afternoon, showing me a thank you letter from a young couple who'd bought their first house with one of our mortgages. "This is why we're doing this. This is what makes all the hard work worthwhile." That letter was the first of hundreds we received over the years from families whose lives were changed by our willingness to see potential rather than just risk. But our success at the bank was only part of what we were building. We were also creating a family. Michael James Henderson was born on September 3, 1982, just 6 months after we purchased the bank. Another perfect baby. Another promise to provide everything we'd never had as children. Awala. With 2 children under 3 and a growing business to manage, our lives became a carefully choreographed dance of shared responsibilities. James handled early morning duties before going to the bank. I managed evening routines after finishing my hospital shifts. We traded off night feedings, weekend childcare, and household responsibilities. It was exhausting, but it was also exactly what we dreamed of. A growing family, a successful business, and the financial security to provide our children with opportunities we'd never had. Our savings account, which had been depleted by the bank purchase, started growing again, not as quickly as before, since we now had a mortgage payment and 2 children to support, but steadily. How much do we have saved now? I asked James one evening as we planned our monthly budget. $15,000, he said, plus the equity we're building in the bank and the salary increases I've given myself as our profits grow. $15,000 in savings, ownership of a profitable business, a growing family, steady career advancement for both of us. Noi mit. We were winning, mit noi. But more than that, we were building exactly the kind of life we'd envisioned when we first started planning our future together. Financial stability without materialism. Professional success without losing sight of family priorities. Achievement that we could be proud of because it was earned through hard work and smart decisions. James, I said one night as we sat on the front porch of the small house we'd bought near downtown Richmond, do you ever wonder if we're being too ambitious, trying to accomplish too much too quickly? Never, James said without hesitation. Dorothy, we're not being ambitious enough. We have the opportunity to build something that will provide security for our children and their children. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that? He was right. We weren't being greedy or materialistic. We were being strategic about creating the kind of generational stability that neither of us had experienced as children. What's our next goal? I asked. A bigger house, James said immediately. Something with more space for the children and room for entertaining business clients. I want to establish Henderson Community Bank as the premier financial institution in Richmond, and that means projecting success. How big a house? I asked. Big enough to matter, James said. Something that makes a statement about what's possible when you work hard and make smart decisions. That conversation led to our decision to start looking for a house that would become our family's permanent anchor. Not just a place to live, but a home that reflected everything we were building together. We spent months driving through Richmond's most established neighborhoods, looking at houses that were far beyond anything either of us had grown up with. Colonial mansions with circular driveways, Victorian estates with wraparound porches, contemporary designs with soaring ceilings and wall-to-wall windows. This one, I said when we toured a 1920s colonial in the historic Fan District. This is our house. The house was magnificent. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, formal dining room, library, and a kitchen that was larger than the entire apartment I'd grown up with in Cleveland. The lot was nearly an acre, with mature trees and landscaping that had been maintained by previous owners who clearly took pride in their property. Pesam, it was also expensive. $165,000, which was 3 times what we'd originally planned to spend on housing. Dorothy, James said as we walked through the master bedroom, this is a lot of house. It's not too much house, I said confidently. It's exactly the right amount of house for what we're trying to accomplish. I could see the vision clearly. Jessica and Michael growing up in rooms large enough for sleepovers and study groups. Holiday dinners in a dining room that could accommodate extended family and business colleagues. A home office where James could host bank meetings and community events. Can we afford it? James asked. I'd already done the calculations. We can afford it if we're smart about the financing and continue growing our income at the current rate. What about our other savings goals? James asked. This is our savings goal, I said. James, we're not just buying a house. We're buying the foundation for everything else we want to accomplish, a place where our children can grow up with confidence and security, a home that represents the success we've earned. That evening, we made an offer on 1247 Maple Avenue. It was accepted the next day. Moving into that house in November 1983 was like stepping into the life we'd always dreamed of. Jessica was 3 years old. Michael was just over a year, and we were finally living in a home that matched our aspirations. "Look at this kitchen," I said to James as we unpacked boxes on our first night in the new house. The kitchen was 3 times the size of any kitchen I'd ever worked in, with modern appliances and enough counter space to prepare meals for large groups. "Look at this backyard," James said, watching Jessica and Michael explore the fenced yard that would become their private playground. That house became the anchor for everything we built over the next 40 years. It was where we raised our children, hosted countless family gatherings, and entertained the business colleagues who helped James expand Henderson Community Bank into a regional institution. But most importantly, it was where we created the memories that I thought would bind our family together forever. Birthday parties and graduation celebrations, Christmas mornings and summer barbecues, the everyday moments of love and laughter that I believed were building unbreakable bonds between parents and children. The house where Jessica and Michael learned what it meant to live with abundance without losing sight of the values that created that abundance. The house they would eventually abandon me to protect from their vacation plans. But that November night in 1983, as I tucked Jessica and Michael into beds in their new bedrooms, I felt nothing but gratitude and excitement about the future we were building together. We'd come so far from our humble beginnings. We'd achieved financial success through hard work and smart decisions. We'd created a beautiful home where our children would grow up with every advantage. What I didn't know was that 40 years later, those same children would see my life-threatening medical crisis as an inconvenience to their travel schedule. But I also didn't know that the same determination and strategic thinking that had built our success would eventually save me from their betrayal. The woman who'd lifted herself out of poverty and built something extraordinary was still inside me. She was just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone, including my own children, exactly what Dorothy Henderson was capable of when someone underestimated her. They were about to find out. The next 20 years of our lives were defined by one principle. Every decision we made was guided by what would be best for our family's long-term success. Not what was easiest or most comfortable in the moment, but what would create the strongest foundation for Jessica and Michael's future. James and I didn't just work jobs. We built careers with purpose and intention. Every promotion, every opportunity, every financial choice was calculated to move us closer to our ultimate goals. Doan at IPB. At Henderson Community Bank, James transformed what had been a sleepy, small-town institution into Richmond's premier community financial center. But he didn't do it by cutting corners or chasing quick profits. He did it by treating every customer like family and every loan like a personal investment in someone's dreams. "Mrs. Patterson wants to expand her catering business," James told me one evening as we reviewed loan applications at our kitchen table. This had become our routine. After the children were in bed, we'd spend an hour discussing the bank's business. Not because I was officially involved, but because James valued my input on the human side of financial decisions. "What kind of expansion?" I asked. "She wants to buy the building next door and add a bakery component," James explained. "The numbers are tight, but her business has grown consistently for 3 years. I think she can make it work." "What do the other banks say?" I asked. "They turned her down," James said. "Too risky for a small business owned by a single woman." That attitude was exactly why Henderson Community Bank was thriving. While larger institutions rejected loans based on rigid formulas and demographic assumptions, James looked at character, work ethic, and business potential. "Are you going to approve it?" I asked. "Already did," James said with a smile. "Mrs. Patterson reminded me of you when you were starting out. Sometimes the best investments are in people who have everything to prove and nothing to lose." Mrs. Patterson's Bakery became one of Richmond's most successful small-dot businesses. But more importantly, her success story attracted other entrepreneurs who needed a banker, willing to see potential rather than just risk. By 1985, Henderson Community Bank had tripled its loan portfolio and doubled its customer base. James had hired 8 additional employees and was considering opening a second location. "Dorothy," he said one evening as we celebrated the bank's best quarter ever, "I think we found our calling." "What do you mean?" I asked. "This isn't just a business for us," James said. "It's a ministry. We're helping people achieve dreams they couldn't achieve anywhere else." He was right. Every week, brought thank you letters from families who'd bought their first homes, small business owners who'd expanded their operations, or young couples who'd consolidated debt and gotten back on their feet financially. We weren't just earning money. We were making a difference in people's lives while building something we could pass on to our children. But success at the bank was only possible because of the sacrifices we made in other areas of our lives. James worked 60-hour weeks during the bank's expansion phase. I continued, working full-time as a nurse while managing most of the household responsibilities and child care. Our social life was almost non-existent. We rarely went out to dinner or took vacations. Most of our entertainment consisted of family activities that didn't cost money. Picnics in the park, trips to the library, backyard barbecues. With neighbors. "Don't you ever want to just relax?" my friend Carol asked. One afternoon as we watched our children play at the neighborhood pool. Carol's husband worked for a large corporation, and they seemed to have much more leisure time than James and I did. "This is relaxing," I said, gesturing toward Jessica and Michael splashing happily in the shallow end. "Watching our children grow up healthy and happy is the most relaxing thing I can imagine." But Carol's question made me think. Were we sacrificing too much in the present for an uncertain future? Were Jessica and Michael missing out on experiences? Dami Cap because their parents were always working? Dami Karis as sin battleten. That evening I brought up my concerns with James. "Do you think we're being too focused on work?" I asked. "The children are only young once. Maybe we should slow down and enjoy this time more." James considered the question seriously. "Dorothy, what kind of childhood do you want Jessica and Michael to have?" "A happy one," I said immediately. "What would make them happy?" James asked. "More toys? More entertainment? Or the security of knowing their parents are building something stable and lasting?" I thought about my own childhood. The constant worry about money. The uncertainty about whether my father would have work next week. The knowledge that we were always one crisis away from losing everything. "Security," I said. "I want them to grow up with the kind of security we never had." "Then we keep building," James said. "We work hard now so they never have to worry the way we worried. We sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term stability." That conversation reinforced our commitment to the path we'd chosen. We weren't depriving our children. We were investing in their future in ways they wouldn't understand until they were adults. Nantala. The proof of our success was visible in how Jessica and Michael were thriving. Both children were excellent. Students who participated in extracurricular activities and had strong friendships. They were confident, articulate, and secure in ways that reflected the stability we were providing. "Mom, can I invite Sarah over for a sleepover this weekend?" Jessica asked one afternoon when she was 8 years old. "Of course," I said, "but let's make it special. We'll bake cookies and rent a movie." "Really?" Jessica said, her eyes lighting up. "Sarah's mom usually just orders pizza when I sleep over there. Homemade cookies instead of delivery pizza. A family movie night instead of expensive entertainment." These were the ways we showed love while staying true to our financial goals. But our careful budgeting didn't mean our children went without. Jessica took piano lessons. Michael played Little League baseball. Both children had bicycles, toys, and clothes that were appropriate for their social circle. We just made sure that every expenditure served a purpose beyond immediate gratification. "I want to take guitar lessons," Michael announced when he was 7 years old. "Why guitar?" James asked. "Because Tommy Morrison takes guitar lessons and he can play songs that everyone knows," Michael said. James and I exchanged glances. Music lessons were expensive, and Michael had shown no previous interest in musical instruments. "Here's what we'll do," James said. You can take guitar lessons for 3 months. If you practice every day and show real commitment, we'll continue. If you lose interest, we'll find something else that captures your attention. 3 months later, Michael was practicing guitar for an hour every day and asking for a better instrument. The lesson wasn't just about music. It was about commitment, follow-through, and earning privileges through dedication. Michael umusi malesa perennimen mio achatire. These were the values we tried to instill in everything we did. Hard work leads to rewards. Commitment produces results. Nothing worthwhile comes without effort. By 1987, when Jessica was 7 and Michael was 5, our sacrifices were paying off in measurable ways. The bank was generating substantial profits. My nursing career had advanced to a supervisory position with significantly higher pay. Our house had appreciated in value. Our savings accounts were growing steadily. More importantly, we were becoming recognized leaders in Richmond's business community. James served on the board of the Chamber of Commerce. I volunteered with the hospital's charity auxiliary. We hosted fundraising events at our house for local nonprofits. You know what this means, don't you? James said one evening as we reviewed our financial statements. What? I asked. We're not just successful, James said. We're becoming influential. People look to us for leadership and guidance. That influence came with responsibilities. James was invited to serve on city planning committees and economic development boards. I was asked to chair fundraising campaigns for various charitable organizations. We need to be careful, I told James as we discussed these new opportunities. We don't want to become so involved in community activities that we neglect our own family. Agreed, James said. But Dorothy, we also have an obligation to use our success to help others. Isn't that part of what we're trying to teach Jessica and Michael? He was right. Success without service was just selfishness. We wanted our children to understand that privilege comes with responsibility. So we found ways to involve Jessica and Michael in our community activities. They helped serve meals at charity events. They participated in fundraising walks and volunteer projects. They learned that successful families contribute to their communities rather than just taking from them. Why do we have to do all this volunteer stuff? Jessica asked one Saturday as we prepared to spend the morning working at a food bank. Because we've been blessed with more than we need, I explained. When you have more than enough, you share with people who don't have enough. But it's boring, Jessica complained. Some of the most important things in life are boring, James said. That doesn't mean they're not worth doing. These lessons in service and responsibility were as important as anything Jessica and Michael learned in school. We wanted them to grow up understanding that success meant more than accumulating wealth. It meant using that wealth to make a positive difference in other people's lives. But our community involvement also created new opportunities for business growth. James's reputation for integrity and sound judgment led to loan referrals from other business leaders. My nursing supervisory role connected me with Richmond's medical community, which became a significant source of bank customers. Dr. Williams wants to meet with you about financing for his new practice, I told James one evening after work. The cardiologist? James asked. Yes, I said. He's been impressed with how you've handled loans for other medical professionals. He wants Henderson Community Bank to be his primary financial institution. But our careful budgeting didn't mean our children went without. Jessica took piano lessons. Michael played Little League baseball. Both children had bicycles, toys, and clothes that were appropriate for their social circle. We just made sure that every expenditure served a purpose beyond immediate gratification. I want to take guitar lessons, Michael announced when he was 7 years old. Why guitar? James asked. Because Tommy Morrison takes guitar lessons and he can play songs that everyone knows, Michael said. James and I exchanged glances. Music lessons were expensive, and Michael had shown no previous interest in musical instruments. Here's what we'll do, James said. You can take guitar lessons for 3 months. If you practice every day and show real commitment, we'll continue. If you lose interest, we'll find something else that captures your attention. 3 months later, Michael was practicing guitar for an hour every day and asking for a better instrument. The lesson wasn't just about music. It was about commitment, follow-through, and earning privileges through dedication. Skipar. These were the values we tried to instill in everything we did. Hard work leads to rewards. Commitment produces results. Nothing worthwhile comes without effort. By 1987, when Jessica was 7 and Michael was 5, our sacrifices were paying off in measurable ways. The bank was generating substantial profits. My nursing career had advanced to a supervisory position with significantly higher pay. Our house had appreciated in value. Our savings accounts were growing steadily. More importantly, we were becoming recognized leaders in Richmond's business community. James served on the board of the Chamber of Commerce. I volunteered with the hospital's charity auxiliary. We hosted fundraising events at our house for local nonprofits. You know what this means, don't you? James said one evening as we reviewed our financial statements. What? I asked. We're not just successful, James said. We're becoming influential. People look to us for leadership and guidance. That influence came with responsibilities. James was invited to serve on city planning committees and economic development boards. I was asked to chair fundraising campaigns for various charitable organizations. We need to be careful, I told James as we discussed these new opportunities. We don't want to become so involved in community activities that we neglect our own family. Agreed, James said. But Dorothy, we also have an obligation to use our success to help others. Isn't that part of what we're trying to teach Jessica and Michael? He was right. Success without service was just selfishness. We wanted our children to understand that privilege comes with responsibility. So we found ways to involve Jessica and Michael in our community activities. They helped serve meals at charity events. They participated in fundraising walks and volunteer projects. They learned that successful families contribute to their communities rather than just taking from them. Why do we have to do all this volunteer stuff? Jessica asked one Saturday as we prepared to spend the morning working at a food bank. Because we've been blessed with more than we need, I explained. When you have more than enough, you share with people who don't have enough. But it's boring, Jessica complained. Some of the most important things in life are boring, James said. That doesn't mean they're not worth doing. These lessons in service and responsibility were as important as anything Jessica and Michael learned in school. We wanted them to grow up understanding that success meant more than accumulating wealth. It meant using that wealth to make a positive difference in other people's lives. But our community involvement also created new opportunities for business growth. James's reputation for integrity and sound judgment led to loan referrals from other business leaders. My nursing supervisory role connected me with Richmond's medical community, which became a significant source of bank customers. Dr. Williams wants to meet with you about financing for his new practice, I told James one evening after work. The cardiologist? James asked. Yes, I said. He's been impressed with how you've handled loans for other medical professionals. He wants Henderson Community Bank to be his primary financial institution. That's why. Dr. Williams became one of our largest customers, but more importantly, he introduced James to other physicians who needed banking services tailored to medical practices. Within 2 years, Henderson Community Bank had become the preferred lender for healthcare professionals throughout Central Virginia. We're developing a specialty, James observed as he reviewed our loan portfolio. Medical practice financing is becoming a significant part of our business. Is that good or bad? I asked. It's very good, James said. Specialization allows us to offer better service and charge premium rates. Medical professionals are also excellent credit risks, with stable income streams. This evolution towards specialized lending was typical of how James approached business growth. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, he identified areas where Henderson Community Bank could offer superior service and built expertise in those niches. The results were impressive. By 1990, the bank had $50 million in assets and was consistently ranked among the most profitable community banks in Virginia. James had been named Richmond's Young Entrepreneur of the Year by the Chamber of Commerce. More importantly, our family's financial position had improved dramatically. We'd paid off our mortgage early. Our savings and investment accounts totaled over $200,000. Jessica and Michael's college funds were fully funded. Dorothy, James said one evening as we celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary, do you realize what we've accomplished? I looked around our beautiful home, thought about our thriving business and healthy children, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. We've built exactly the life we dreamed about, I said. "We've built more than that," James said. "We've created something that will last for generations. Jessica and Michael will never have to worry about financial security. Their children won't have to worry. We've broken the cycle of economic uncertainty that both of us grew up with." Breaking the cycle. That phrase captured exactly what we'd accomplished. Neither James nor I had inherited wealth or advantages. We'd created them through 15 years of disciplined choices and strategic sacrifice. But our success hadn't come at the expense of our family relationships. If anything, the shared purpose of building something meaningful had brought us closer together. Jessica, now 10 years old, was a confident, articulate child who excelled in school and had strong friendships. She played piano beautifully, participated in school theater productions, and showed early signs of the leadership qualities we'd tried to model. Michael, 8 years old, was developing into a thoughtful, responsible boy who took his commitments seriously. His guitar playing had evolved from childhood interest to genuine musical talent. He was also an excellent student and natural athlete. "Look at them," I said to James one evening as we watched Jessica help Michael with his math homework. "They're growing up to be exactly the kind of people we hoped they'd become. Smart, confident, and caring," James agreed. "They understand the value of hard work and the importance of helping others. Or so we thought." What we didn't realize was that growing up with financial security and stable family life might actually be working against some of the values we were trying to instill. Jessica and Michael had never experienced uncertainty about money. They'd never wondered whether their parents would be able to provide for their needs. They'd never seen their parents struggle with difficult financial decisions. In some ways, our success was creating the very complacency we'd been trying to avoid. "I need money for the school fundraiser," Jessica announced one afternoon when she was 11. "How much money?" I asked. $50, Jessica said casually, as if $50 was a trivial amount. "$50 for what, specifically?" James asked. "I don't know," Jessica said with a shrug. "Some kind of donation. Everyone's parents are giving $50. James and I exchanged concerned glances. Jessica's attitude toward money was becoming too casual. She saw $50 as pocket change rather than a significant expenditure that required justification. "Jessica," I said carefully, $50 is a lot of money. Before we donate that amount, we need to understand what cause we're supporting and why it's important." "Mom, it's just $50, Jessica said with exasperation. "We have plenty of money. Just $50. We have plenty of money." These were not the attitudes we wanted our daughter to develop about financial responsibility. That evening, James and I had a serious conversation about whether our children were learning the right lessons from our success. "Maybe we've been too generous," I said. "Maybe they need to understand what money actually represents." "You might be right," James agreed. "They see the results of our hard work, but they haven't experienced the work itself." We decided to implement new rules about money and responsibility in our household. Jessica and Michael would receive allowances, but they'd have to earn them through specific chores and responsibilities. They'd be required to save a portion of any money they received. And they'd need to present detailed justifications for any significant expenditures. "Starting next month, you'll earn $5 per week for completing your assigned responsibilities," James told Jessica and Michael. "Half of that money goes into savings. The other half you can spend however you choose." "What if we want to buy something that costs more than $250? Michael asked. "Then you save until you have enough," I said. "Or you find ways to earn additional money through extra chores or special projects." These new rules weren't popular initially. Jessica complained that her friends didn't have to save their allowances. Michael grumbled about having to do chores that we'd previously handled ourselves. But within a few months, both children were showing more appreciation for money and more thoughtfulness about their spending decisions. "I've been saving for 3 months to buy this book series," Jessica announced proudly when she finally had enough money for a purchase she'd been wanting. "How does it feel to buy something with money you saved yourself?" James asked. "It feels different," Jessica admitted, "like it matters more because I worked for it." That was exactly the lesson we'd been hoping to teach. Money that's earned feels different from money that's given. Purchases that require sacrifice feel different from impulse buys. By the time Jessica was 13 and Michael was 11, They'd developed much healthier attitudes toward money and responsibility. They understood that our family's financial security came from hard work and smart decisions, not from luck or entitlement. More importantly, they'd learned to contribute to the family's success rather than just benefit from it. "I want to help at the bank this summer," Michael announced when he turned 12. "What kind of help?" James asked. "Filing, organizing, answering phones," Michael said. "Whatever needs to be done. I want to learn how the business works." James hired Michael as a part-time summer employee, paying him minimum wage for legitimate work responsibilities. By the end of the summer, Michael had gained valuable insights into banking operations and a deeper appreciation for the complexity of running a successful business. "Dad works really hard," Michael told me one evening after a day at the bank. "I didn't realize how many decisions he has to make every day." Jessica also started showing interest in the business side of our lives. She helped me organize charity events and accompanied James to community meetings, where she could observe how business relationships were built and maintained. "I like seeing how you and Dad are involved in making the community better," Jessica told me after attending a Chamber of Commerce dinner. "That's part of being successful," I explained. "When you do well, you have a responsibility to help others do well too." These experiences were shaping Jessica and Michael into young adults who understood both privilege and responsibility. They were learning that success required effort, that money had to be earned, and that wealthy families had obligations to their communities. Or so I believed. What I didn't understand was that watching success is different from building it. Jessica and Michael had observed our achievements, but they hadn't experienced the struggle, uncertainty, and sacrifice that created those achievements. They'd grown up secure, comfortable, and confident, but they'd never been tested by real adversity. They'd never had to choose between competing priorities with limited resources. They'd never experienced the fear that motivates people to work harder than seems humanly possible. In some ways, our success had protected them from the very experiences that had shaped our character. But I wouldn't discover the full implications of this protection until 40 years later, when I was fighting for my life in an ICU and they were choosing vacation plans over their mother's medical crisis. The children I'd raised with such love and dedication, the children I'd sacrificed for and provided with every advantage, would reveal that they'd learned very different lessons from our success than the ones James and I had tried to teach. They'd learned that money was always available when they needed it, that problems could be solved by writing checks, that their parents would handle any crisis or difficulty that arose. But they'd never learned that love and loyalty can't be bought, that family obligations work both ways. That respect has to be earned, even from your own children. 40 years later, when they abandoned me in that ICU to protect their vacation deposits, I would realize that all our success, all our sacrifice, all our careful planning had created exactly the kind of entitled, selfish adults we'd been trying to avoid raising. But I would also realize that the strength, the determination, and strategic thinking that had built our success was still inside me, waiting for the right moment to remind everyone, including my own children, what Dorothy Henderson was capable of when someone made the mistake of underestimating her. Now you understand who I was before Jessica and Michael abandoned me in that ICU. You know, the woman they thought was too weak, too sick, and too dependent to fight back against their betrayal. Ba me man, ba me man, ba me man, ba me man hasio baids. They were about to learn how wrong they were. While my children were posting vacation photos from Cabo, I was making the most important phone calls of my life. Calls that would change everything about our family dynamic forever. My first call was to Richard Morrison, the attorney who'd handled our family's legal affairs for over 20 years. Richard had drawn up our wills, managed business contracts for the bank, and guided us through complex financial decisions. "Dorothy," Richard said when he answered his phone, "I heard about your heart attack. How are you feeling?" "I'm feeling very clear about some things that need to change," I said. "Richard, I need to see you as soon as possible about modifying my will." "Of course," Richard said. "I can come to the hospital this afternoon if you're up for it." "I'm more than up for it," I said. "Bring the current documents. We're going to make some significant revisions." Richard arrived 3 hours later with a briefcase full of legal documents and a laptop computer. He looked concerned as he sat up at the small table beside my hospital bed. "Dorothy, You've been through a traumatic medical event, he said gently. Are you sure this is the right time to make major decisions about your estate? Richard, I said, this is exactly the right time. I've learned some things about my children that I wish I'd known sooner. I told him about the overheard conversations. About Jessica and Michael's decision to prioritize their vacation over their mother's medical crisis. About their casual dismissal of my condition and their eagerness to enjoy one last trip before dealing with, quote, funeral arrangements and estate stuff. Richard listened without interrupting, taking notes and occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. I'm not surprised, he said when I finished. In my experience, people's true character is revealed during family crises. I've seen too many families torn apart by children who saw their parents as obstacles to inheritance rather than people worthy of love and respect. What are my options? I asked. Legally, you have complete discretion over your estate, Richard explained. You can leave your assets to anyone you choose, with whatever conditions you deem appropriate. Over the next 2 hours, we restructured my entire estate plan. Jessica and Michael would receive token inheritances of $10,000 each. Not enough to change their lives, but enough to ensure they couldn't claim they'd been forgotten accidentally. The bulk of my estate would be divided between charitable organizations and a scholarship fund for nursing students from low-income families. Young women like I'd been 50 years ago, who needed financial assistance to escape poverty through education. Henderson Community Bank will continue operating under professional management, Richard explained as he drafted the new documents. The profits will fund the scholarship program and support local charities that help elderly people avoid family exploitation. What about the house? I asked. Donated to the Richmond Historical Society with the stipulation that it be maintained as a museum showcasing successful small business development in Virginia, Richard said. Your story will help inspire other entrepreneurs while preserving the home you and James built together. The new will ensured that everything James and I had created would continue serving positive purposes long after I was gone. Our life's work would help other people achieve their dreams rather than simply enriching two adults who'd shown they didn't deserve the privilege of inheritance. There's one more thing, I said as Richard prepared the final documents for my signature. I want to record a video message explaining my decisions. Something Jessica and Michael can watch after I'm gone to understand exactly why they forfeited their inheritance. Richard set up his laptop to record as I delivered a message that took me 3 attempts to complete without crying. Jessica and Michael, I said, looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this, it means I've died and you've just learned that you inherited almost nothing from your parents' life's work. You're probably shocked, angry, and confused. Let me explain why this happened. Your father and I spent 40 years building financial security and a beautiful legacy that we planned to pass on to you. We sacrificed our own comfort, worked longer hours than seemed humanly possible, and made countless decisions based on what would be best for your future. We raised you with love, provided you with every advantage, and tried to teach you values that would make you worthy of the inheritance we were creating. But when I was fighting for my life in the ICU, you chose a vacation over your mother's medical crisis. You discussed my death as an inconvenience to your travel plans. You reduced the woman who gave you everything to an elderly burden whose demise would be more convenient than her continued existence. That choice revealed who you really are. And who you really are is not the kind of people who deserve to benefit from a lifetime of someone else's sacrifice. The money you thought you would inherit is now helping young women escape poverty through nursing education. The business your father built is supporting charitable organizations that protect elderly people from family exploitation. The house where you grew up is preserved as a museum that will inspire other entrepreneurs for generations to come. Everything your parents created is making the world better, which is what we always intended. We just thought you would be part of that positive impact rather than the reason for this decision. I hope someday you understand that love and loyalty cannot be taken for granted, that family obligations work both ways, and that respect must be earned, even from your own children. Goodbye, Jessica and Michael. You had the opportunity to inherit something beautiful. You chose poorly. Richard witnessed my signature on the new will and sealed the video message in an envelope to be opened only after my death. Dorothy, he said as he packed up his documents, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've seen families destroyed by greed, entitlement, and betrayal. But I've rarely seen someone handle betrayal with as much dignity and strategic thinking as you've shown today. Wallo di aside, that's of it. Richard, I said, I didn't survive childhood poverty and build a successful life by accepting defeat when people underestimated me. Jessica and Michael are about to learn that their mother is much stronger than they assumed. My second strategic call was to Dr. Patricia Chen, my cardiologist. I needed medical documentation of my current condition and prognosis to protect myself from any future claims that my estate planning decisions were made while I was incompetent. Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Chen said when she arrived for our appointment, your recovery has been remarkable. Your cardiac function is stable, your mental acuity is completely normal, and I see no reason why you can't expect many more years of healthy, independent living. Could you document that assessment in writing? I asked. I may need medical evidence of my competence if anyone questions decisions I've made during my hospitalization. Of course, Dr. Chen said, making notes in my chart. Mrs. Henderson, is someone pressuring you about financial or legal matters? I explained the situation with Jessica and Michael. Their abandonment, their casual discussions of my death, their assumption that I was too weak to do anything about their betrayal. That's unconscionable, Dr. Chen said. Mrs. Henderson, what you've described could constitute elder emotional abuse. Have you considered reporting this to Adult Protective Services? I'm handling it through legal channels, I said. But yes, I want their behavior documented in case future action becomes necessary. Dr. Chen spent an hour conducting comprehensive cognitive and physical assessments that confirmed my complete mental and physical competence. Her report would make it impossible for anyone to claim that grief or medication had impaired my judgment during the estate planning process. My third call was to Margaret Foster, a social worker who specialized in elder advocacy. Margaret had spoken at community events about protecting elderly people from family exploitation, and I wanted her assessment of Jessica and Michael's behavior. Mrs. Henderson, Margaret said when she arrived at the hospital, what you've described is a textbook example of elder emotional abuse. Adult children who prioritize their own convenience over a parent's medical crisis are demonstrating a pattern of behavior that often escalates to financial exploitation. What kind of escalation? I asked. Pressure to sign over assets, manipulation about care needs, isolation from friends and support systems, Margaret explained. The same mindset that allows someone to abandon a parent in the ICU often leads to other forms of exploitation as the parent becomes more vulnerable. Margaret helped me develop a safety plan that would protect me from future manipulation attempts. Emergency contacts who weren't family members. Legal documentation of my competence and care preferences. Financial safeguards that would prevent unauthorized access to my accounts. Mrs. Henderson, Margaret said as she prepared to leave, you're taking exactly the right steps to protect yourself. Too many elderly people accept mistreatment from family members because they're afraid of being alone. You're refusing to be a victim. I've never been a victim, I said. I'm not starting now. On the fourth day of Jessica and Michael's vacation, I received a text message that revealed just how little they understood about the situation they'd created. Hi, Mom. Having a great time in Cabo. Weather is perfect, and food is amazing. Hope you're feeling better. See you when we get back. Love you. Red heart. Hope you're feeling better. As if I'd been suffering from a minor cold, rather than fighting for my life, while they sipped margaritas on the beach. I showed the message to Sarah, my day shift nurse, who'd been following the drama with fascination and disgust. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah said, I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've seen a lot of family dysfunction during medical crises, but I've never seen anything quite this callous. Sarah, I said, would you be willing to document what you've observed about my children's behavior? I may need witness statements if this situation escalates. Absolutely, Sarah said. What they've done is inexcusable. You deserve so much better. Sarah's statement, along with observations from other hospital staff who'd witnessed Jessica and Michael's casual abandonment, created a comprehensive record of their behavior during my medical crisis. By the time my children returned from Cabo on Friday afternoon, I had completely restructured my legal, financial, and medical affairs. I'd documented their abandonment from multiple perspectives. I'd created legal protections against future manipulation. And I'd ensured that their betrayal would have consequences they never anticipated. Most importantly, I'd rediscovered something I'd forgotten during decades of playing the role of generous, nurturing mother. I was Dorothy Henderson, the woman who'd lifted herself out of poverty through determination and strategic thinking. The woman who'd built a successful business and beautiful family through refusing to accept defeat. The woman who is about to remind Jessica and Michael exactly what their mother was capable of when they made the mistake of underestimating her. They arrived at the hospital Friday evening, tanned and relaxed from their beachfront vacation. Jessica carried a bag from the hotel gift shop. Michael had a souvenir t-shirt for me from their resort. "Mom," Jessica said brightly as they entered my room, "you look so much better. We brought you some presents from Mexico." "How are you feeling?" Michael asked, settling into the chair beside my bed. "We missed you, but it sounds like you're doing great." They were acting like nothing had happened. Like abandoning their mother during a life-threatening medical crisis was perfectly normal behavior that required no explanation or apology. "Sit down," I said calmly. "Both of you, we need to talk." Something in my tone made them pause. Jessica's bright smile faded slightly. Michael looked uncertain. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Jessica asked. "You seem upset." "I am upset," I said. "I'm upset that my children chose a vacation over their mother's medical emergency. I'm upset that you discussed my death as an inconvenience to your travel plans. I'm upset that you reduced the woman who gave you everything to an elderly burden whose demise would be convenient for your lifestyle." The color drained from both their faces. They'd assumed I was too sedated to remember their conversations, too weak to do anything about their abandonment. "Mom, we can explain," Michael started. "No need," I said, reaching for the folder of documents Richard Morrison had left with me. "I've had plenty of time to think about your choices while you were enjoying your vacation, and I've made some choices of my own." I handed them copies of my new will. "What is this?" Jessica asked, scanning the legal documents with growing alarm. "Your inheritance," I said. $10,000 each, congratulations." $10,000? Michael said, his voice rising. "Mom, what are you talking about? What about the house? What about the bank? What about everything you and Dad built?" "Everything your father and I built is going to people who will appreciate it," I said. "Young women who need help escaping poverty through nursing education. Charitable organizations that protect elderly people from family exploitation. The Richmond Historical Society, which will preserve our home as a museum." "You can't be serious," Jessica said, her face flushing with anger and panic. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You've been through a traumatic experience. Let's talk about this when you're feeling better." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said. "Jessica, when you were 8 years old and wanted to quit piano lessons because they were too hard, what did I tell you?" "I don't remember," Jessica said impatiently. "I told you that quitting when things get difficult is how people stay mediocre," I said. "I told you that excellence requires commitment, even when it's inconvenient." "What does that have to do with anything?" Michael asked. "It has to do with the fact that you quit on your mother when being there for me became inconvenient," I said. "You chose convenience over commitment. You chose vacation over family loyalty. You chose selfishness over love." "Wah. Mom, that's not fair," Jessica protested. "We needed that vacation. We'd been planning it for months. We thought you were stable." "You thought I was dying," I said. "I heard you say so. You were planning to have one last good vacation before dealing with funeral arrangements and estate stuff." Both of them looked stricken. They'd forgotten how much unconscious patients can actually hear and remember. "The woman you abandoned in this ICU was someone who spent 70 years learning how to fight for what she believed in," I continued. "Someone who built everything you thought you would inherit through determination and strategic thinking. Someone who doesn't accept defeat when people underestimate her." "What can we do to fix this?" Michael asked desperately. "Mom, we're sorry. We made a mistake. Tell us how to make it right." "You can't make it right," I said. Michael, trust is like a mirror. Once it's broken, it's never the same again. You shattered my trust when you chose to abandon me during the most vulnerable moment of my life. But we're your children, Jessica said, tears starting to flow. We're your family. Doesn't that mean anything? Being my children means you had the greatest privilege and the greatest responsibility, I said. You had the privilege of being raised with love, security, and every advantage. You had the responsibility to honor that privilege through loyalty and respect. We do love you, Michael said. We do respect you. Love and respect are demonstrated through actions, not words, I said. Your actions showed me exactly how much I mean to you when my life was on the line. I could see them processing the full implications of what I'd done. Not just the financial consequences, but the complete transformation of our family dynamic. Mom, Jessica said quietly, what happens now? Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices, I said. I'll recover from this heart attack and live independently for as long as I'm able. When I die, everything your father and I built will help other people achieve their dreams. What about us? Michael asked. You'll figure it out, I said. The same way I figured out how to escape poverty. The same way your father figured out how to build a successful business. The same way every generation has to figure out how to create their own success instead of inheriting someone else's. Jessica and Michael left the hospital that evening in stunned silence. Over the next few weeks, they made several attempts to contact me, to apologize, to negotiate some kind of reconciliation that might restore their inheritance. I refused all their overtures. They'd had their entire lives to learn how to treat me with love and respect. They'd had 43 and 41 years respectively to understand that family loyalty works both ways. They'd had decades to appreciate the sacrifices their parents made to provide them with security and opportunities. Talks. They'd chosen to abandon me when I needed them most. Now they would live with that choice forever. 6 months later, I was fully recovered and living independently in my beautiful home. The same house where I'd raised Jessica and Michael with such love and hope for their futures. But now it was truly my sanctuary. A place where I was surrounded by 40 years of memories with James, and free from the disappointment of children who'd proven themselves unworthy of the legacy we'd tried to create for them. I volunteer with elder advocacy organizations, helping other elderly people recognize and resist family exploitation. My story has become a teaching tool for social workers and attorneys who work with vulnerable adults. I've started a support group for elderly people who've been abandoned or betrayed by their own children. We meet monthly to share our experiences and remind each other that family betrayal doesn't define our worth or our future. Most importantly, I've rediscovered the strength and independence that defined me before I became someone's mother and grandmother. I'm Dorothy Henderson again, not just Jessica and Michael's mom, but a woman with her own identity, goals, and purpose. The nursing scholarships I established have already helped 12 young women begin their careers in healthcare. Women like I was 50 years ago, who needed financial assistance to escape difficult circumstances through education and determination. The historical museum in my former home tells the story of how James and I built success through hard work and community service. Visitors learn that true wealth isn't about accumulating money. It's about creating something meaningful that outlasts your own life. Everything we built is serving the positive purposes we always intended. It's just not benefiting the people we thought would carry forward our legacy. As for Jessica and Michael, I understand they both struggled financially after losing their expected inheritance. Jessica's marriage ended in an expensive divorce. Michael's business ventures failed. They both discovered what it means to face life's challenges without a family safety net. They learned, as I learned 70 years ago, that security has to be earned rather than inherited. That success requires sacrifice and determination, not just family connections. Some people might say I was too harsh. That children deserve forgiveness no matter what they do. That family bonds should survive even the worst betrayals. But I believe that love without accountability isn't really love. It's enabling. And respect that isn't earned isn't really respect. It's fear. Jessica and Michael had every opportunity to be worthy of the inheritance they thought they deserved. They chose selfishness over service, convenience over commitment, entitlement over gratitude. Nasaka, they made their choices. I made mine, and I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that the life James and I built together is still making the world a better place, just not in the way we originally planned. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give ungrateful children is the opportunity to learn that actions have consequences, even when those consequences are permanent. My name is Dorothy Henderson. I'm 71 years old. I live independently in a beautiful home that will become a museum when I die. I'm healthy, financially secure, and surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can give them. Most importantly, I'm free from the burden of loving people who saw my love as weakness rather than strength. The text message that started this story said, "Sorry, Mom, can't cancel Cabo. The deposits are non-refundable." My response, delivered through a lifetime of changed circumstances, was simple. Sorry, Jessica and Michael, but trust, once broken, is also non-refundable. Karma isn't always dramatic or immediate. Sometimes it's quiet, strategic, and absolutely final. Sometimes it looks like a 70-year-old woman who refuses to be anyone's victim, even her own children's. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.